The corridors of St. Aurelia Medical Center echoed with the quiet hush that only settled after 2 a.m. Outside, the winter wind pressed itself against the emergency bay windows, howling like some distant animal that had lost its way. Inside, Nurse Olivia Parker moved through the dimly lit third floor with mechanical precision. Her white sneakers whispered across the tile, her clipboard hugged tightly to her chest. She had worked night shifts for almost 5 years, enough time to see most things. But there was something different about that night. The kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace, but rather like the breath being held before something ruptured. Olivia passed the ICU doors without pause, nodded at the sleepy security guard who barely looked up from his crossword puzzle, and made her way towards the stairwell. She had one last round to check, one last vital sheet to sign. Then she could clock out to call her sister like always and go home. What happened next would never make it to that checklist. Olivia had never taken the basement route before. It wasn't part of her rotation. But when the supply room on the first floor ran out of IV tubes, she had to improvise. Someone from the ER mentioned an overflow cabinet stored in the old service corridor beneath the hospital. It was used years ago before the new wing was built. Most nights it was locked. That night, for reasons no one would ever explain, the door was ajar. It creaked open just wide enough for her to slip through without alerting anyone. She didn't think twice. Olivia was the kind of nurse who didn't waste time with questions. Efficiency had been drilled into her since nursing school. She pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped through the steel-framed threshold, letting the door click shut behind her. She wouldn't step back through it again. The basement smelled of rust and ammonia. The air was colder here, heavy with the musk of disuse and something else she couldn't name. Her flashlight flickered once before stabilizing. The hallway was longer than expected, lined with peeling signs and faded arrows pointing toward rooms labeled maintenance and morgue storage. Dust hung thick in the air, visible in the beam of her phone light. Her footsteps echoed louder than they should have. Each step rang back at her like something unseen was listening. Olivia quickened her pace, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. She reached a junction where 3 hallways split like crooked tree roots. To the left, an elevator shaft sealed with caution tape. Ahead, the path narrowed into a storage room blocked by a rusted cart. And to the right, the faint hum of electricity. She followed the sound, believing it would lead her to the supply cabinet. It did not. A sudden clang behind her made Olivia whip around. Her flashlight trembled as it swept across the corridor. Empty, just the rust-colored walls and the occasional flicker of an old overhead bulb. But the air had shifted. She could feel it. A subtle vibration underfoot, like something mechanical, had stirred awake. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned back toward the electrical hum, only to find that the hallway had darkened. The lights above had gone out in a silent sweep, leaving only her phone to pierce the black. She stepped forward carefully, listening now to something other than her heartbeat. A low sound. Not metal, not wind. Breathing. Shallow and near. Olivia spun again, flashlight jittering against the walls. Still nothing. No one. She laughed softly to herself, a nervous chuckle that echoed far too far for comfort. Probably her own breath, she told herself, probably the ducks settling or the wind. The clipboard in her hand now felt like a lifeline. She took one step forward, then another. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, the screen lighting up with a cheery, "Hey, you off yet?" Olivia went to respond, but paused. Something was written on the wall ahead. The words were scrawled in a dark, almost burnt streak across the beige paint. It was smeared, like someone had dragged fingers through it. The sentence was simple. "Do not open the red door." Olivia froze. Her mind snapped between disbelief and curiosity. She lifted her flashlight and followed the direction the message pointed. At the far end of the hallway, past 2 overturned gurneys and a row of defunct soda machines, was a red door, newer than everything around it. Clean. Not rusted, no sign of age. It almost gleamed against the dust-heavy gloom. She approached slowly, drawn by a strange magnetism she couldn't rationalize. Her hand reached for the knob before she realized what she was doing. Behind her, a footstep. Not hers. She turned sharply. Nothing, just the echo again. She laughed nervously. Foolish. Stress. Lack of sleep. She shook her head, reminded herself she just needed the IV kit, and turned back to the red door. But it was gone. Where it had stood was now a blank wall, smooth and uninterrupted. She stepped back, startled, her flashlight jumping in her hand. Her eyes darted up and down the hallway. Had she imagined it? She blinked hard, trying to recalibrate her senses. The air had grown colder enough that she could now see her breath puffing out in short clouds. She turned around again, this time ready to leave. She had had enough. No IV kit was worth this. That's when her flashlight died. And with it, the corridor. The next morning, Nurse Olivia Parker was marked as a no-show. Her badge was eventually found on the floor near the sealed service elevator, the last known place her GPS badge had pinged. Security footage showed her entering the stairwell at 2:06 a.m., but no footage existed of her ever leaving. No one remembered seeing her after that round. Her car remained in the lot. Her locker untouched. Her phone strangely kept receiving texts for the next 2 days before it too was disconnected. No search team found any trace of her in the upper floors. The basement was overlooked at first. After all, no one went down there. It wasn't on any active map. It had been sealed, they said. But as weeks turned into months and Olivia's photo faded on the hospital's missing persons board, something remained unsettled in the air. Something just beneath. Waiting. 6 months passed since Olivia Parker vanished from St. Aurelia Medical Center. The incident had morphed into a whispered legend among the staff. New nurses asked in hushed tones about the missing woman whose shift never ended. The official statement remained vague. A tragic disappearance under investigation. Unresolved, unexplained. Her family pushed for answers, but received only procedural dead ends. Internally, the hospital moved on. Floors were mopped, forms were filed, and patients came and went beneath fluorescent lights. But the basement remained sealed. Or so they believed. What no one knew was that a single maintenance corridor below Wing C still connected to the forgotten sublevel. That passage had been buried under years of renovations, but one janitor knew it existed. His name was Leo Franklin. He was quiet, methodical, and older than most of the equipment he repaired. Unlike others, Leo remembered when the hospital had more than 5 floors. He remembered when the basement was used for storage and laundry. He remembered hearing stories about what had been sealed off after the riot in '89. But he had never gone down there. Not until the valve incident. The night started like many others. Leo clocked in at 10:15, grabbed his checklist, and began his usual routine. The 3rd floor had a flickering emergency sign. Wing A needed a plumbing inspection. He worked alone and preferred it that way. At midnight, a maintenance alert pinged on his pager. Pressure drop in the lower mechanical line. The alert did not mention the basement, but the location code was familiar. Leo frowned as he pulled out an old blueprint from his satchel. Most of the younger staff ignored the older plans, but Leo kept them close. The pressure line linked to valve 7B, an emergency bypass rarely used, and it ran dangerously close to the sealed corridor. Leo sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and made his way to the service elevator. He did not report the issue. He did not want anyone following. When Leo reached the sublevel access, he paused. The steel door showed signs of rust, but the latch was clean. Recently touched. He pulled it open with a grunt. The air changed immediately. Colder. Drier. As if time had stopped in this passage. His boots echoed against the concrete as he stepped inside. The corridor was narrower than he remembered. Pipes ran along the ceiling like arteries. Old signs peeled from the walls, names of departments long defunct. He walked slowly, flashlight scanning ahead. Valve 7B was just past the junction. When he reached it, he knelt to inspect the pressure gauge. The needle fluttered wildly, which should not have been possible. Leo reached for the control lever. It stuck at first, then gave with a sharp click. The pipe hissed violently, releasing a wave of air that smelled like wet metal and something far more ancient. As the pressure equalized, something shifted beneath his boots. The vibration was subtle, like a heartbeat. Then came the sound. Not mechanical, not water. A soft knock, 3 beats, then silence. Leo stood quickly, flashlight aimed at the valve casing. Nothing moved. He backed away slowly, but then noticed something he had missed. A line of dust disturbed by faint drag marks. They led around the corner toward the old laundry chamber. Leo hesitated. He had not signed up for ghost stories, but the dragging path was fresh. Something had moved, or someone. He followed the marks down the darkened hallway. The deeper he walked, the more his body resisted, not from fear, but from instinct. Every step into that hallway felt like a step away from safety. His light landed on a door at the far end, wooden with peeling paint. A rusted sign hung crookedly from a nail. It read Morgue Staging. Leo reached for the handle. His fingers hovered inches above it. Then he stopped. The air around the door was colder than ice. A single breath fogged in front of him. He turned away, retreating quickly back toward the junction. He needed someone else to see this. He would report it now. This was beyond plumbing. Back at the security station, Leo explained what he found. The guard, a man named Harris, raised an eyebrow but said little. Together, they returned with an extra flashlight and a radio. When they reached the valve room, the corridor was as Leo left it. But the drag marks were gone. The dust had settled. No sign of movement. Harris gave him a look that said he would write this off as stress. Still, he noted it in the incident log and advised Leo to finish his shift above ground. Leo agreed, but his mind stayed in that corridor. Later that night, as Leo sat in the janitor's break room, he reviewed the valve panel logs. Something odd caught his attention. Valve 7B had registered a pressure increase for exactly 4 minutes at 2:06 a.m., the same time Olivia had vanished 6 months ago. The data had been archived and forgotten. No one had thought to correlate the timing. Leo leaned back in his chair, the paper trembling in his hands. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Something was beneath them. Something had stirred when that valve opened. And whatever it was, it had left a trail that night. The next morning, Leo did not sleep. His shift ended just after sunrise, but his thoughts refused to let him rest. The numbers from the valve log circled in his mind like vultures. The drag marks, the dead air, the knock. All of it formed a pattern he could not ignore. He brewed a pot of bitter coffee and sat at his kitchen table surrounded by old notebooks and faded floor plans. He had kept them for years out of habit, but now they served a purpose. He found a blueprint from the early 90s, one that still listed the old departments. Morgue, staging, psychiatric overflow, and even a corridor marked Red Room Access. He circled the last one with a shaking pen. The label had been scratched out on later maps. Leo knew he had seen something dangerous, but he also felt something else beneath it. A voice faint and submerged, asking not to be forgotten. That night, Leo returned early for his shift. He wore an old maintenance jacket, one that let him blend in without drawing attention. He checked in, waved at Harris, and made a show of inspecting a faulty panel in the parking level. And then he doubled back toward the freight elevator. It was inactive, but still functional. He pried open the doors manually and descended to the sublevel with only his flashlight and a crowbar. This time, he was prepared to force his way through. He stepped into the cold corridor again, the air stale and unmoving. The hallway ahead seemed darker than before, as if the shadows themselves resisted his presence, but Leo pressed on. He turned left at the junction back toward the staging room. His steps echoed softly, muffled by a layer of fresh dust. Halfway down the corridor, Leo stopped. The drag marks had returned, faint but present, as if they had been retraced. He crouched to examine them and noticed something else. Letters. Scratched into the dust with a trembling hand. Help her. The writing stopped abruptly as if interrupted. Leo stood heart pounding. Someone had tried to leave a message. Recently. He pushed open the morgue staging door. The hinges groaned in protest. The room beyond was cluttered with old equipment and broken gurneys. The overhead lights were long dead, but his flashlight revealed a pathway through the debris. At the far wall, something glinted. A metal tag. He moved closer and realized it was an old patient bracelet, the kind used decades ago. He turned it over. The name had faded, but part of the ID remained. It ended in 2043. Olivia's ID badge had the same series. Leo stepped back, nearly stumbling over a sheet-covered form on the floor. He froze. The shape beneath the cloth was too precise. Human. He leaned down, reached out and pulled back the cover slowly. It was a mannequin, cracked porcelain skin, eyeless sockets, medical training dummy from a forgotten era. But someone had written across its torso in marker, "Not mannequin." Leo dropped the sheet, stumbled back and turned toward the door. The air had grown thicker. Behind him, something moved, a soft shift, a breath. He spun around, light dancing across the walls. The mannequin had not moved. But the door was no longer fully open. A slow creak followed as it began to swing shut. Leo dashed forward, wedging the crowbar into the frame just in time. The door resisted, as if something on the other side pushed back. He shoved with all his strength, finally breaking free into the hallway. He ran, flashlight jerking wildly. The corridor twisted behind him like a throat closing. He reached the junction, gasping, and paused only to glance back. The hallway was empty, still, but the air vibrated. The knock returned. This time, it came not from a door, but from the walls themselves. A single beat, then silence. Back at the maintenance office, Leo collapsed into his chair. He wiped the sweat from his face with trembling hands. The crowbar still vibrated faintly where he had gripped it. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder labeled Incident A-23. It was from the archives. Leo had accessed it months ago while researching old inspection logs. He flipped it open and scanned for a specific name. Dr. Samuel Ames. Psychiatric Director 1985 to 1991. Dismissed after an inquiry into patient mistreatment. No charges filed. No further record. But there was a report buried inside. A nurse anonymous had claimed to hear voices from the morgue staging vents. The date was eerily close to the last recorded fire alarm drill on file, one that was never explained. Leo called Harris but got no answer. He left a message. "Something is down there. I have proof now. Please call me." He ended the call and sat back, staring at the blueprint on the wall. He connected the dots with red string. Valve 7B. Morgue staging. Red room. Access. Everything intersected at one point. The service tunnel labeled Utility Shaft F. It had not been used since the early 80s. It was now blocked according to official records. But Leo had seen that map. There was a door. And doors could be opened. By the next night, Leo had a plan. He had memorized the old blueprint and marked every known access point with a red X. Only one had not been welded shut during the renovations. It sat behind an old boiler in the sub-basement, concealed beneath a metal hatch disguised as a drain cover. Leo brought a tool bag, a battery-powered lantern, and a disposable phone. He left a sealed envelope with Harris containing everything he had learned. If something went wrong, someone had to know. The hospital continued on as normal above him, oblivious. But Leo knew this was not a maintenance issue anymore. It was a matter of truth. Something had been hidden down here for decades, and Olivia had stumbled into it. He descended through the freight lift again and made his way past the valve room. Every step now felt rehearsed. The air grew colder, more damp. He found the boiler chamber unlocked. No cameras faced this section. He dropped to his knees beside the metal grate and unscrewed it slowly, fingers trembling. Beneath it, the darkness yawned like an open throat. The ladder descended 20 feet into pitch. Leo took a breath, slung the lantern over his shoulder, and climbed down one rung at a time. The metal creaked but held. When he reached the bottom, his boots landed on solid concrete. The space around him was a narrow shaft, not more than 6 feet wide, with thick black cables running overhead. His light flickered as if protesting the atmosphere. The tunnel stretched in both directions. To the left it curved sharply. To the right it continued straight. Leo followed the curve. The walls grew tighter. At intervals, faded stenciled letters appeared. SF2, PS3, codes from another era. A breeze passed his face, carrying with it a scent that turned his stomach. Decay and bleach. The two smells collided like conflicting timelines. He pressed forward until the tunnel opened into a chamber the size of a classroom. The walls of the chamber were lined with lockers, each one numbered. On the floor, shattered tiles formed a pattern he could not decipher. At the center sat a chair bolted to the ground. Restraint straps hung from the arms, frayed but intact. Leo moved cautiously. His light landed on a metal box affixed to the far wall. Inside were files. Dozens of them. He pulled one at random and flipped it open. Patient 43B. Female, unresponsive to lithium. Shows signs of dissociation. Recommends isolation. He scanned further. The initials matched the faded tag he found near the mannequin. This was not storage. It had been a treatment area. An unregistered one. He turned to leave, but then froze. A new sound joined the air. Breathing. Soft, labored. Coming from somewhere behind the lockers. Leo backed toward the exit tunnel, raising his light. The breath paused, then resumed louder. He turned and began moving quickly, heart hammering in his chest. The passage seemed longer now, as if it had stretched while he was inside. When he finally reached the ladder, he climbed without looking down. He emerged, gasping, dragging the grate shut behind him. But as he looked around, he saw it. A footprint. Not his, smaller, bare, freshly pressed into the dust by the boiler. That same night, Olivia's sister received a text from an unlisted number. It contained only 2 words. Red Room. She had not heard those words in months, not since she begged the police to check the old psychiatric wing. They had refused. She read the message again, then called the number. No answer. She looked up Leo's name, remembered him from the news coverage. A janitor who had searched for Olivia when no one else would. She called the hospital, asked to speak to him. The receptionist said Leo had not checked out yet. It was nearly 4 a.m. Worried, she drove to Saint-Louis. Aurelia, and parked behind the ambulance bay. The side entrance was still accessible to family of employees. She wore her badge from when she used to volunteer at the front desk. No one stopped her. She moved quietly through the halls, avoiding cameras. She found the maintenance room locked, but jimmied it open with an old trick she remembered from high school. Inside, Leo's logbook lay open. The most recent entry was dated just 3 hours prior. The words utility shaft underlined twice. She searched the cabinet drawers and found a second blueprint copy. The same path was marked. She memorized it quickly, then headed down the freight corridor. Her palms sweated as she descended into the cold sub-basement. Every creak of the walls reminded her of Olivia's voice, always calm under pressure. Her sister had been fearless. It was her turn now. She found the grate behind the boiler and opened it. The ladder waited, and she climbed without hesitation. The tunnel below welcomed her like a forgotten dream. The cold bit through her jacket, but she moved fast, light in hand. She reached the curved passage, found the coated walls. The chamber ahead loomed. When she entered it, she stopped. Leo was already there. He turned slowly, face pale. He said only 2 words. It spoke. The words hung between them like frost. It spoke. Olivia's sister, whose name was Mia, took a slow breath, trying to gather her thoughts. Her boots scraped against the floor as she moved toward Leo, who still stood near the locker wall with his hands slightly raised. His eyes darted toward the ceiling, where thick rusted vents crisscrossed the upper corners of the chamber. Mia followed his gaze. The sound had returned. A whisper, not words, but cadence, a human pattern repeating in breathless rhythm. Mia stepped closer to the chair at the center of the room, her fingers brushing against the restraint straps. They were worn from use, frayed and discolored. The air had grown colder again. She could now see her own breath forming in slow clouds that drifted upward and disappeared into the darkness above. The vents trembled lightly. Leo motioned for her to follow his hand, pointing toward the left corridor that branched from the chamber. It led deeper into the tunnel network. Mia nodded and kept close behind him. She had not come this far to retreat. The corridor they entered was narrower, lined with cracked tiles and peeling insulation. Old medical signs hung crooked on the walls, their print faded beyond legibility. As they walked, the whispers grew more distinct. A phrase repeated again and again. "It hurts." The words echoed through the vents in a trembling voice neither childlike nor adult. Mia tried to record the sound with her phone, but the device glitched as soon as she hit record. The screen blinked red, then froze. Leo's light flickered to dimming momentarily before stabilizing. The hallway opened into a side room with broken metal beds arranged in rows. Each bed had iron shackles welded to the frame. Mia paused beside one and noticed fingernail scratches gouged into the headboard. She felt nausea rising in her throat but forced herself to look. The scratches formed letters. 3 of them. OLP, Olivia's initials. Her legs buckled for a second before she found her strength again. Leo scanned the room with his lantern. In the far corner, a metal cabinet had fallen sideways, its contents spilled onto the floor. He approached it and found scattered photos among the debris. Black and white images. Patients restrained in bed frames. Some with eyes covered. Others with mouths open mid-scream. Their names had been burned into the photo borders. Mia crouched beside him, flipping through the pile. Her hands froze when she saw a photo of a girl with wide eyes and a braided ponytail. It was Olivia. Her name was etched faintly along the edge. She looked terrified. Behind her stood a shadowed figure face obscured. Mia pressed the photo to her chest and stood in silence. A low vibration passed through the floor, causing the walls to groan. Pipes above them shuddered in response. The voice from the vent shifted again. This time, it said one word. Closer. Without speaking, Leo pointed toward another corridor. The blueprint in his mind told him it led to the last known section of the shaft. He called it Red Room Junction. It had been sealed on most plans, but the path remained untouched. They passed through a crooked frame where double doors once stood. Beyond that, the air felt heavier. The tunnel curved downward slightly and moisture lined the walls. Every 10 feet a red bulb flickered overhead, emergency lights from decades past still functioning on backup power. At the end of the hall, they found a reinforced door with a grated slot at eye level. Leo hesitated, then stepped forward and peered through. His breath caught. On the other side, the room glowed faintly red. A rectangular chamber with glass walls on each side. Inside the left enclosure, someone moved. A figure sat in a fetal position on the floor, wrapped in what looked like a torn hospital gown. Hair, matted arms, bruised head, tucked to knees. Leo turned to Mia and motioned her forward. She stepped to the grate and looked in. Her body went rigid. It was Olivia. Mia pounded on the door, screaming her name. The figure inside flinched but did not raise her head. A speaker crackled above them, ancient wiring sparking to life. A voice filtered through, warped by static. "You should not be here." Mia stepped back. The voice was not human. It was too deep, too layered, like multiple voices stacked together. Leo checked the frame and saw a control panel beside the door. Most of the buttons were broken or rusted, but one switch blinked faintly green. He flipped it. A heavy groan followed. Hydraulic locks hissed. The door creaked open. They entered cautiously. The air inside smelled of iodine and blood. The glass enclosure was cracked in several places. Olivia looked up slowly as they approached. Her eyes were sunken, her face pale and emaciated. She spoke in a whisper. "Do not touch the glass." Mia dropped to her knees, reaching toward her sister. Olivia placed a hand to the pain palm pressed gently. Mia mirrored it. Leo circled the room and found a control console behind the glass. Notes were taped along the panel in faded ink. One line read, "Do not disable sedation sequence." Leo scanned for power lines. He would need to break the system to open the enclosure. Leo studied the control panel closely. Every surface was covered in dust, but the blinking lights suggested that power still ran beneath the age-stained plastic. He traced the wires leading from the enclosure back to a breaker box in the wall. Most of the switches were labeled in a code he did not understand. Some were marked with numbers, others with single letters. A faded note pinned beside the panel caught his eye. It read, "Sequence must never be fully interrupted." Leo considered the risk but knew hesitation would buy them nothing. He reached for the main switch tied to the red-lit chamber and toggled it. The room darkened slightly. Olivia jerked forward, her body convulsing as if every muscle fired at once. Mia screamed and pressed her hand to the glass again. Olivia clawed weakly at her neck, gasping. Then, just as suddenly, she went still. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes lifted. Clearer now, less fogged. She saw Mia fully for the first time. Her lips formed her sister's name without sound. The sedation had begun to wear off. Mia looked at Leo, her voice trembling as she asked if they could open the chamber now. Leo nodded, but warned her with his eyes. They were meddling with something designed to stay sealed. The hydraulic release button blinked red. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He pressed again. Still locked. He checked the cables and followed a conduit that led around the back of the room. A small service hatch sat partially ajar. Inside, a manual override lever was secured with a metal clamp. Leo grabbed the crowbar from his pack and forced it open. The lever moved with resistance, but after a sharp pull, it clicked into place. A hiss filled the room as pressure equalized. The glass enclosure cracked further, then slid open with a slow, dragging sound. Mia rushed to Olivia and helped her to her feet. Olivia's legs were weak, unaccustomed to motion. But she stood. She whispered again, "We have to leave now." Leo supported her other side as they turned to exit. The red lights flickered. The vents above them groaned. A low-frequency hum vibrated the floor. Something was coming. They stepped into the hallway and began moving quickly, Olivia between them. As they passed back through the double doors, a loud metallic clang echoed behind them. The red room door had slammed shut. Locks re-engaged automatically. From behind the door, a sound erupted. A scream, inhuman and layered with static. It was followed by a high-pitched frequency that caused Mia to double over, covering her ears. Leo pulled both women forward, forcing them into motion. They passed the restraint room again. This time, the bed shook violently as if something underneath them strained to rise. Leo did not look. He guided them toward the main tunnel shaft, heart pounding. Olivia whispered between shallow breaths, "It lives in the vents." Mia asked what it was, but Olivia only repeated one word. "Remnant." Leo cursed under his breath and increased their pace. As they neared the ladder, the overhead pipes rattled. Dust poured down. A shape moved within the shadows above them, long and fluid, like smoke but heavier. It scraped against the metal grates and dropped something that hit the ground with a wet thud. Mia glanced back. It was a hospital ID, not Olivia's. It was dated 1987. The name had been scratched off. Leo reached the ladder and helped Olivia up first, then Mia. He followed last, just as the shadows below twisted into the open space and formed a mass that pulsed with a dim reddish glow. They reached the boiler room and resealed the grate. Leo jammed the crowbar into place. They ran, through the freight corridor, up the service hall, past the unused laundry chute and into the maintenance wing. Only when the steel doors of the upper floor closed behind them did they stop to breathe. Olivia collapsed onto the floor, eyes darting wildly. Her skin was damp with sweat. Mia crouched beside her, holding her tightly. Leo slumped against the wall, staring at nothing. The hospital above was quiet. Normal, indifferent, but something beneath had been disturbed. Mia called Harris. He answered this time, groggy. She told him everything in under a minute. At first, he did not believe her. Then she said Olivia was with them. That changed everything. Within an hour, an emergency alert was triggered, not for the patients, but for internal staff. Several floors were closed for maintenance. Access to the lower levels was revoked. The boiler wing was officially off-limits. Security personnel were dispatched, but most were unaware of the real reason. Harris met them in the staff break room and stared at Olivia as if seeing a ghost. She had been presumed dead. Her return would not be explained publicly. Later that morning, Mia sat beside her sister in a private clinic room. Olivia slept, her breathing slow but steady. Leo stood by the window watching the sunrise over the east lot. Harris entered quietly and handed Leo a sealed envelope. Inside was a copy of the original patient admission list for Wing R. Every name was marked with a status. Deceased, transferred, unlisted. One name was circled in red, Olivia Parker, but her admission date was 6 hours after her disappearance. Someone had filed it retroactively. Someone had known. Harris spoke softly. The records came from a locked archive unmarked. He had no idea how long they had been there. 3 days passed. Olivia remained under observation in a secure wing of the hospital monitored by a small team Mia personally selected. Her condition stabilized, but her mind wandered between clarity and confusion. She spoke in fragments, often mentioning Vent's whispers and a place she called the still room. Mia kept a journal of every word, hoping to piece together the truth. Meanwhile, Leo and Harris worked behind the scenes tracing the chain of responsibility for the secret sublevel. They knew someone within the administration had authorized Olivia's admittance retroactively. That person had access to records most staff did not even know existed. Their search led them to an off-site document storage unit registered to a now-defunct research department affiliated with St. Aurelia. It had been closed since 1992. The location was still listed under the hospital's legal holdings, buried under layers of bureaucracy. Leo and Harris drove there late in the evening. The sun long set the city lights behind them dim and distant. The building stood alone at the edge of a forgotten industrial park, its windows covered and doors sealed with rusted chains. They pried open a side entrance and stepped into stale darkness. The air was thick with mold and paper rot. The floor creaked beneath them as they passed rows of filing cabinets and stacked boxes. Their flashlights cast long shadows that danced across dusty walls. At the back of the room, they found a locked cabinet labeled R-Wing Historical Records. The lock had been cut recently. Leo exchanged a look with Harris. Someone else had been here. They opened the cabinet and found dozens of file folders arranged by year. Most were faded, but several had been replaced with fresh labels. These files were newer, tampered with. Leo pulled one marked 1996 and scanned the contents. It contained transcripts of patient interviews, none of which appeared in the hospital's digital archive. One transcript stood out. It described a subject identified only as Patient Z. The interview notes mentioned auditory hallucinations, a fixation on vents and drawings of shadow figures. The final page included a chilling line, "Patient claims the voice is not his own. It belongs to what lives in the walls." Harris found another file marked Incident Reports. It contained references to a sedation protocol matching the one used on Olivia. The document listed it as remnant containment procedure designed to isolate and suppress parasitic influence in psychologically vulnerable individuals. The term remnant appeared repeatedly, always capitalized. It was never defined clearly. One notation simply read, "Do not initiate contact without supervisory presence." Several names were blacked out, but one remained visible. Dr. Samuel Ames. The same director dismissed decades ago. Attached to the file was a black and white photograph. It showed Ames standing beside a glass observation room. Inside was a young woman restrained in a chair. The image was blurry, but her posture and hair matched Olivia. Leo stared at the photo rage rising in his chest. This was not a new phenomenon. This had happened before. They continued searching and found a locked drawer within a rusted desk. Inside was a single cassette tape and a note written in shaky handwriting. "If you hear this, it means the seal has been broken." Harris pocketed the tape and they exited the building quickly. Back at the hospital, they located an old player and pressed play. A male voice filled the room, low and weary. "This is Dr. Ames. If this archive has been disturbed, then the containment has failed." The remnant is not a delusion. It is a surviving fragment. It feeds on isolation and unresolved memory. Do not engage it directly. It mimics the familiar. It will use faces, voices. Do not trust what you recognize. The tape ended with a distorted whisper that did not belong to Ames. A second voice layered over the static. We never left. Leo turned off the machine and looked to Harris. They both understood now. Olivia had not simply been imprisoned. She had been selected. Chosen for a role in a cycle that the hospital had kept buried. The sublevel was not an accident. It was a vault. And the thing below was not dormant. It waited. Mia listened to the tape and sat beside Olivia's bed, her hand resting gently on her sister's. Olivia stirred and opened her eyes. Her voice was calm. It knows you are here. Mia asked what she meant, but Olivia only whispered, The voice is older than this place. It does not forget. Later that night, Mia could not sleep. She sat by the window of the clinic room watching the faint glow of the hospital's rooftop lights shimmer through the fog. Olivia slept peacefully now, her breaths steady and calm, but Mia could not shake the words she had whispered. The voice is older than this place. Mia's thoughts kept circling back to the file from the archive, the one that referenced mimicry and the use of familiar voices. The idea unsettled her deeply. What if it had already spoken to her and she did not know it? What if the voice she heard in Olivia's room weeks ago when she first arrived had not been her sister at all? She stood and walked to the hallway. A low buzzing came from the ceiling vent overhead. It was soft, rhythmic, like someone breathing through a metal pipe. Mia's spine stiffened. She stepped closer, trying to discern the pattern. Then she heard it. A voice whispered her name, not once, but 3 times. Each time it sounded more like Olivia, but it came from inside the vent. She turned and rushed back into the room. Olivia remained asleep untouched. Her expression was peaceful. The voice had not come from her. Mia's hands trembled as she checked the temperature dial on the wall, then pressed the emergency call button. Harris arrived first, already halfway through the building on routine patrol. She explained what she heard, her voice sharp and focused. Harris did not hesitate. He called Leo, who was at home reviewing more documents. Within 30 minutes, they had regrouped in the service corridor near the upper ventilation grid. Harris climbed onto a folding chair and unscrewed the panel covering the primary air duct. The air inside was colder than the rest of the hospital. His flashlight revealed claw marks etched into the metal lining. Not scratches from rust or corrosion, but deliberate patterned scrapes. Leo studied the pattern and recognized the same markings from the floor in the Red Room chamber. The sequence matched the words, "Help her." They followed the vent trail using an inspection crawlspace map. It led to an old HVAC control room on the 4th sublevel, a space that should have been dismantled years ago. The room was still intact. The panel lights were off, but the control boards were live. Harris powered the room using a portable generator he brought from the maintenance wing. When the consoles booted up, several screens blinked in sequence. Most showed static. One displayed a feed from a camera facing a hallway none of them recognized. The walls were lined with photographs, each one hung with a single tack. The faces in the photos were distorted eyes, blacked-out mouths, blurred. Leo leaned in and realized the hallway resembled the path leading to the morgue chamber. But this one had no door, just a dead end. Mia noticed something else. In the bottom corner of the screen, a time code flickered. It matched the exact minute when Olivia had vanished 6 months ago. The feed was from that night. It had never stopped recording. Another screen lit up. This one displayed temperature readings from various parts of the sublevel. One room showed a sudden spike. The reading jumped from ambient to 75 degrees in seconds. Then it dropped again. A residual heat source. Possibly human, or something pretending to be. Harris downloaded the data onto a portable drive. They needed a secure location to analyze it. Back upstairs, they met with a trusted technician who worked the night shift in radiology. He owed Harris a favor. Together, they examined the footage more carefully. At the 13-minute mark, a figure appeared in the hallway on screen. It wore a hospital gown and walked slowly, almost aimlessly, but the face was turned away from the camera. The figure paused, turned, and stared directly into the lens. The image distorted slightly, its features flickered. One moment it looked like Olivia. The next, it became something else, a face Mia did not recognize, but felt she should. The technician tried to freeze the frame. The screen went black. Olivia woke just before dawn. Her voice was stronger now, though still faint. She asked for Mia and Leo. When they arrived, she pointed to the vent in her room. Her expression was clear, her words deliberate. "It knows you found the feed. It is watching from the vents. It does not want to be alone again." Mia asked how she knew. Olivia responded slowly. "Because it tried to become me. It needed a voice that others would follow, a name they would search for. It used my absence as its shell. It wore me like memory." Olivia remained awake through the next day. Her clarity improved, but her emotions ran uneven. She often stared at corners of the ceiling, particularly near the air vents, as if expecting them to move. Mia kept close, never stepping more than a few feet away. Leo and Harris returned to the control room after sunrise, determined to identify where the vent system connected to the unlisted hallway seen in the surveillance feed. Using updated maps overlaid with historical blueprints, they discovered a passage known as Shaft G that had been misfiled in the system. On current plans, it was marked as collapsed. In truth, it had been rerouted behind the psychiatric storage wing. Harris accessed to the crawlspace beneath the surgical prep rooms where the original ventilation met the auxiliary air return. The metal there was newer. Weld marks showed signs of recent maintenance. Someone had reinforced it from the inside. Leo pried open the hatch, and a gust of warm air hit them. The vent was active. They crawled through it slowly, guided by the same whispering patterns heard in Olivia's room. It was not just air movement, it was something that remembered how to breathe like a person. The passage opened into a service tunnel. The lights were dim but functional. Faint red bulbs lined the baseboards, flickering in sync with a low hum. The same photographs from the surveillance feed covered one of the walls. Leo counted 28 images each with distorted facial features. Harris noticed that the faces did not appear random. Many resembled staff members from old personnel lists. One photo, almost completely burned, showed a man wearing a physician's coat. A name tag was just visible. Ames. Leo touched the photo gently. The image beneath crinkled and disintegrated, as if the surface rejected recognition. Mia, who had followed them through the shaft, stepped beside Harris. She scanned the photos again, her eyes locking onto one that caused her breath to catch. The face resembled her as a child. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. Her hand trembled as she removed the image from the wall. Behind it, etched into the wall with a blade, were the words, "We only stay if remembered." Further down the tunnel, they found the source of the heat spike. A chamber lined with old memory beds, padded platforms with overhead mirrors and mounted speakers. The room pulsed with a synthetic heartbeat playing on a loop through unseen speakers. The mirrors reflected distorted versions of whoever entered. Mia saw herself reflected back, older, weary, wearing the same hospital gown as Olivia. Harris refused to look. Leo moved to the far end and found a console. Its monitor blinked once, then displayed a message. Identity not yet assigned. Below it, a prompt asked a simple question. Restore memory pattern YN. Leo hesitated, then pressed yes. The lights dimmed. The speakers fell silent. A new voice emerged, low and female. It spoke like a recording, but the tone shifted as it continued. You have come to take her. But she was given freely. It does not forget who loved her first. The mirror cracked behind Leo. Olivia's reflection appeared in it, briefly eyes black and mouth still. Then it vanished. The floor beneath them vibrated. A hidden panel slid open, revealing a stairwell. Mia stepped forward without waiting. They descended into a lower chamber. At the base, they found a small cell. Inside, there was no person, only sound. A looped recording of Olivia's voice played from a speaker mounted on the wall. She was reading bedtime stories. The same 2 lines repeated, and she closed her eyes, and the world fell still. Leo shut off the speaker. Mia leaned against the wall. Her face had gone pale. She realized this was not just a prison for Olivia. It was a library of emotional patterns, a place where the remnant stored voices it had harvested. It mimicked to survive. And in mimicking it, created identity. The more Olivia had been remembered, searched for, called out to the more powerful its version of her became. But now that the real Olivia was free, the remnant no longer had a mask. It was unraveling. That made it dangerous. Harris signaled them to return. As they reached the upper shaft, the lights behind them shut off in sequence. The walls shook. Something followed. Back on the main floor, Olivia waited with her eyes closed. She whispered a phrase over and over. "Let it rest, let it rest." Mia returned to her and held her hand. Olivia opened her eyes and looked into her sister's face. "It knows now. I was not enough. It is looking for someone else." She reached into her gown and pulled out a scrap of photo. One of the burned images. She had taken it when she escaped the Red Room. It showed a nurse from the late 80s. On the back, in barely legible handwriting, it said, "Not the first. It will remember you too." Morning crept through the hospital blinds like a whisper of forgiveness. It touched the edge of Olivia's bed before reaching her face. She did not wake at first. Her body still weakened by confinement and sedation, but her breath was even and her skin no longer pale. Mia sat beside her, eyes swollen from lack of sleep, her fingers wrapped gently around Olivia's. In her other hand, she clutched the photo scrap. The words on the back echoed in her thoughts, "Not the first. It will remember you too." She had barely spoken since returning from the lower shaft. She kept her silence not from fear, but from a weight she could not yet name. The truth they had uncovered lived in fragments scattered between documents, memories, and voices that did not belong to any one person. The remnant was not a creature in the usual sense. It was a habit of emotion, a parasite of pattern. It survived by being mourned. It endured by being mistaken for someone loved. Mia understood this now. It would not stop searching until someone allowed it to become real again. Leo entered the room quietly, a man forever changed. He no longer walked with casual strides or the steady pace of a janitor who had seen everything. His eyes carried a depth no manual could train for. He handed Mia a folder. It contained final blueprints, old psychiatric logs, and a memo from Dr. Ames labeled Transition Protocol. The memo described an experimental process designed to offload persistent emotional imprints into an isolated cognitive system. The goal was to contain grief to prevent psychological echoing in patients with severe loss trauma. But the results had been catastrophic. The echoes became loops. The loops became voices. The voices became belief. And belief made them real to the mind. The experiment had been buried. Literally. Shaft G and the Red Room were not just containment zones. They were cognitive storage designed to hold the parts of people others could not forget. Olivia had been a perfect vessel because she was loved deeply, searched for relentlessly, and missed in detail. Mia closed the folder and stared at her reflection in the metal IV stand. Her eyes looked older now. There was no fear, only certainty. She stood and kissed Olivia's forehead gently, then walked to Harris, who waited by the service door. He handed her a key card without a word. She nodded. No plan was spoken, only purpose. They descended together one final time through the freight lift and into the auxiliary tunnel. The light was weaker now. Something had changed in the air. The vents no longer hummed. Instead, silence spread through the shaft like dust. They moved quickly, retracing their path through the service corridor past the memory mirrors and burned photographs. Each space now felt hollow. The remnant had withdrawn. It was waiting, not hiding. It had recognized them. At the end of the tunnel, a panel blinked with a single word, awaiting transfer. Mia stepped forward. She placed her hand on the reader. The panel scanned, paused, then accepted. A new prompt appeared. Host recognized. She turned to Leo and Harris, her voice calm, unwavering. This ends with me. Not her. She is already whole again. I remember her as she was. That is enough. They tried to argue, but the system beeped and the door slid open behind her. Warm air swept past them, filled with the scent of old books and salt. Mia stepped inside. The room was round, its walls lined with speakers, each emitting faint echoes of overlapping voices. Names spoken. Lullabies hummed. Pleas whispered through time. In the center stood a single chair, not for restraint, for conversation. She sat. The lights dimmed. A voice filled the space. It sounded like her father, long dead, then her childhood friend, then Olivia, then a nurse from a school memory she barely recalled. Each voice asked the same question. Will you let me stay? Mia closed her eyes. She thought of Olivia's laughter, her stubbornness, the way she danced when no music played. Then she thought of the voices. Empty, hollow, starving. They were not Olivia. They never had been. She whispered one word, no. The lights blinked out. The speakers crackled. A scream rose, long and shrill, then collapsed into static. The room trembled. The system whined as the stored data surged in loops, failing to latch onto a host. Mia gripped the sides of the chair. The walls cracked not from force but from absence. The voices unraveled. With each second she resisted the remnant lost grip on the image it had built. Olivia was no longer its vessel. Mia would not become its next. The scream faded. In its place, silence returned. Upstairs, Olivia stirred and opened her eyes. She sat up slowly, strength filling her limbs. She looked around. Something felt different. She whispered Mia's name not in fear, but in recognition. As if a weight had lifted, Leo and Harris waited by the sealed chamber. The door light flickered once, then turned green. It slid open, revealing the room inside. It was empty. No chair, no speakers, no Mia. Only a folded piece of paper on the floor. Leo picked it up and read it aloud. I remembered her so the voices would forget. Tell her story truly. Let no shadow wear her name again. 1 week later, the hospital announced the permanent closure of sublevel Wing R. All documents regarding Olivia's disappearance were sealed under federal review. The public version cited safety violations. No further details were released. Olivia returned home. She lived quietly, visiting the sea often. She spoke of her sister often. Not of the remnant, not of the voices. Just Mia. Her name became a lighthouse, steady and bright. When asked about the past, Olivia only said this. Memory is not truth. It is choice. I choose the ones who stayed. I let go of the ones who only wanted to be believed. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more mysterious tales just like this. We would love to hear what you think about the plot in the comments and where in the world you're watching from. Your thoughts help keep these stories alive.